Cool Figure TV. Revolutionary Salute. Revolutionary Salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Mina Revolution, and we got a World War III alert. But before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. We got to send our condolences to the family of Irv Gotti. I see everybody's talking about that. Irv Gotti's passed away. We'll deal with that tomorrow. I'll make a video detailing exactly what happened. But RP to Irv Gotti. And I will be talking about tomorrow how disgusting 50 Cent is. The more and more I think about 50 Cent, the more and more I dislike him. But that's not for tonight. We'll deal with that tomorrow. RP to Irv Gotti. I hope his family can find some comfort. But let's get into tonight's message. There will be no peace, just war. We're still dealing with the aftermath of Donald Trump allowing the Zionists to play him and make a big mistake talking about seizing the Gaza Strip.
Now, I don't know if you've seen it. Far too few people have. Peter Sellers' greatest and final film being there is the story of Chauncey Gardner, an idiot who wanders around a walled garden as he has done all of his life, uttering idiot homilies, and some even bigger idiots think it's wisdom, and put him eventually into the White House, where he proceeds to regale the world with the kind of madness that Donald Trump did yesterday in the Oval Office.
Absolutely.
No one could quite believe their ears, including, it seems to me, though I'm open to persuasion on this, Benjamin Netanyahu, who looked at first like a man who thought he was getting a bike for his birthday, only to discover he was getting a car, and then the longer Trump...
Now, with Trump saying yesterday they will be seizing the Gaza Strip, and Benjamin Netanyahu sitting there laughing and giggling because, this is all for them and has nothing to do with anything for America. They just want us to use our money and our foot soldiers and our military hardware so they can seize more land. But we do know that they're talking about the Epstein files are finna be leaked. The Epstein files, I know Trump banned Epstein from Mar-a-Lago, but I know at one time they was buddies. We're not going to overlook that. They was buddies. Yes, he banned them from Mar-a-Lago after he tried to mess with a young girl that was a daughter to one of Trump's partners. But we know that when they're talking about releasing the Epstein files, which they're talking, we're going to look into that today too. The lady is confirmed who said she was going to be doing that. She's going to be releasing that. We know they got Bill Clinton by the balls. He was wearing dresses, all that type of shit for Epstein. But I think Trump is also threatened. All our politicians are threatened by that blackmail that they got, And I'm just saying that to say this. This might be why Trump's so eager to give Gaza to the Israelis, trying to save his own ass. Probably, I'm not saying that's true, but we got to remember Epstein files getting released, and then he humiliates himself. This is humiliating what he did, talking about seizing Gaza. And everybody is talking about that.
Trump went on about how America was going to take over the Gaza Strip. The more he realized that this actually may not be the terrific news that it first sounded. We'll be debating that in the course of the evening with you, the audience, and with two outstanding guests. But here's my tuppence worth for what it is worth. I think this is jolly good news for the Palestinian people, for the Palestinian cause. First of all, it is so utterly unhinged, deranged, and doomed that it strengthens the Palestinian case all over the world and weakens Netanyahu. First of all, it simply, literally cannot be done. Not only is it illegal, I realize that these days that's a mere bagatelle, but it is illegal. And there are many governments in the world, European governments and other allied governments, who are not actually allowed to act illegally. as part of international law, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip are illegally occupied territory. This has recently been confirmed by a landmark judgment of the International Court of Justice in The Hague. So, although that kind of thing doesn't matter to the gunslingers, Elon Musk and Donald Trump and the rest, there are governments in the world that have to worry about that kind of thing, because their own citizens can bring legal actions against them in their own country for acting against international law that their country has signed up to. But secondly, how is Donald Trump going to take over Gaza? The might of Netanyahu's army, air force, and navy, armed to the teeth, brim full with 2,000-pound bombs, with missiles, with tanks, with everything that a military has at its disposal, was not able to control a single refugee camp in the Gaza Strip without suffering sufficient casualties, well into 5 figures, that they had to, in the end, agree to a ceasefire and leave. And all of the Gaza Strip is now once again in the hands of the Palestinian people, amongst whom there are, according to Tony Blinken, at least as many fighters, guerrillas, fedayeen, terrorists, you call them what you like or what your domestic law allows you to call them, at least as many as there were before the Israeli onslaught, the genocidal Holocaust unleashed by Netanyahu began. So how, Donald? Are you going to send in the airborne division? Or perhaps the Marines can wade ashore on that pier that you built at a cost of hundreds of millions of dollars? Oh, wait, that was washed away after only a few weeks. And what happens when you get ashore, Donald, and the resistance start killing your soldiers the way they killed Netanyahu's soldiers? What are the optics of that, Donald? And then there's the, well, not a small issue, that 2 million Palestinians, although there was an interesting shortfall in the numbers that Donald Trump was adumbrating yesterday. He said 1.7 to 1.8 million. But there was 2.3 million Palestinians in Gaza prior to October the 7th. So either that initial figure of 2.3 million was wrong, or Donald Trump's figure of 1.7, 1.8 million is wrong, or Netanyahu killed 500,000 Palestinians in 16 months. Time will tell which of those 3 possibilities, or perhaps permutation of those possibilities, are involved here. But there's the small problem that this beautiful land, this fresh, beautiful land that you're going to give them, is where exactly? Is it in the Galilee? Is it around Nazareth? Is it in the green fields of their own country of Palestine? Where are you going to put 1.8 or 2.3 or 2.1 million people, Donald? Because nobody is going to take them. Hampshire in England isn't going to take millions of Palestinian refugees. New Hampshire in the United States is not going to take millions of Palestinian refugees. Sweden, where there's a mass shooting this evening, the shooter is white, so it won't be terrorism or anything like that. Sweden isn't going to take them. Nowhere is going to take 2 million refugees. Helpfully, you named 2 Arab countries, Jordan and Egypt, where the idea of creating a beautiful land, a garden, is so fanciful, you've obviously never been there. You obviously don't know what Egypt is like, what Jordan is like, topographically, geographically, demographically, economically. You have no idea just how absurd the idea is that either Jordan or Egypt will take millions of Palestinians forcibly deported from their land. Their own public would never accept it. Their own governments would fall if they did so. An incubus of millions of Palestinians forcibly deported from Palestine into their country is merely transferring the war into their own territory, because the Palestinian resistance will not go away, you know. They'll soon be propping up in the garden. And Israel will be bombing the Palestinians, not now in Gaza, but in Jordan or in Egypt. Are you crazy, Donald? Do you think these countries could possibly accept it? Even if you'd negotiated it with them, instead of publicly outing them as being the place where these deported, ethnically cleansed Palestinian refugees are going to live out their lives in your beautiful garden. Of course, neither country can now even discuss your plan, Donald. It would lead to the overthrow of their regimes, which, may I remind you, are regimes that you have long depended on and paid for, because you need them there in order to preserve the pattern of corrupt kings and puppet presidents that rule virtually all, if not entirely all, of the Arab world today, from the Atlantic to the Gulf. You need them, and you've just put them behind the eight ball in a way which can only gravely, severely weaken their position. You then went on to publicly out Saudi Arabia as having abandoned its long-held and declared policy that they will never normalize relations with Israel until the establishment of a Palestinian state. A Palestinian state, I remind you, is the state policy of the United States and virtually every single government in the world. So alarmed were the Saudis at what you said about them. At 4 a.m. this morning in Riyadh, and trust me, they're not normally up at that time, whatever their prayer schedule is. At 4 a.m. this morning, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia and Prime Minister of the country issued a statement describing your plan as evil, making plain Saudi Arabia has not and will never change its policy on this. So either they're lying or you're lying. Such is your credibility, President Trump. I believe the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. But whether you were telling the truth or he is telling the truth, you just made it impossible for him to climb down from the declared policy of his country. So you have succeeded in uniting the entire Arab and Muslim world against you. You have succeeded in forcing the German government, the French government, most governments who've spoken in the European Union to denounce your plan as flatly illegal. Even Anna Baerbock has told you how bonkers your idea is. In fact, the only miserable, shrunken, vicious little satrapy that has not denounced your idiot ideas is the one I'm sitting in right now, Great Britain and Northern Ireland. That's the only European country which has not denounced your plan. So you've united the whole world against you. Mind you, it could have been the run-up that helped achieve that. President Trump, every 72 hours of your presidency, you have announced your intention to take over another country's territory. You threatened to take over Canada. You threatened to take over Mexico. You threatened to take over Greenland. You threatened to take over Panama, and now you are threatening to take over Palestine.
No.
Is this what you meant by putting America first? Is this what America first means? An unhinged bull in a china shop?
Hell no.
Careering around, knocking everything over, and breaking all of your previous relationships. If so, it's cool, it's fine by me. Because it's why I love you, actually. Because you say the quiet part out loud. Not for you, the lying,
Luke Fenner,
two-faced, fork-tongued arts of diplomacy achieved through USAID, achieved through surreptitious regime change, through covert actions, through three-letter agencies. No, you are open and honest, like a thug in The Sopranos, eating your curds and whey at the table outside with your lurid, florid shirt on. That's you, Donald Trump. You are the true face of the American empire. You are the real American empire, the ugly American. That's you. And so everyone can see it now. And the question is, and it's a question their public will be asking, what are we going to do about this? We now have this gruesome twosome, Netanyahu and Trump, thinking they can bludgeon and blast their way through every international crisis and problem, irrespective of who gets cut down in the crossfire. What are we all, the rest of us?
We have to denounce this imperialistic behavior of Trump, pretending like cheating people. See, he don't want to. You want America to be able to compete, well, you need to train Americans and give them trade so they compete with the outside world. Trying to bully nations, that's not going to go nowhere because the American military is not ready for these fights. But Trump got to listen to the Zionists. Like I said, these presidents scared to die. They don't want to be assassinated. They definitely been threatening this man. Let's not forget, they already took a shot at him. You know, now we see where he's starting naked imperialism and aggression, and we got to denounce that. We got to be on the record, letting everybody, we do not go along with this nonsense.
The rest of the world, the 97% of the world that are not America, what are we going to do about it? Now, breaking news, even more bizarrely, Trump says he hasn't committed to troops in Gaza. So how are you going to take over without any troops? Whose troops are you going to use?
Listen,
and what method?
You got to go underground to fight Hamas. They don't want that Hamas underground smoke. Let's stop the let's stop the games here. In the beginning of this war, Court Figure told y'all it's all good, fly over people, kill innocent people, but when you have to do the guerrilla fighting, the jungle fighting, like the Vietnamese said, you can grab them by the belt. That's underground. Then it's mano a mano. It's about who got the heart. You know, They can't give you heart. That U.S. military is not giving any heart out. Ain't no heart for sale. You feel what I'm saying? And I told you all that trying to be home for Christmas and I just want to do my tour and go home. That don't work when you're fighting these guerrilla fighters. U.S. need to mind their fucking business before they get a historical ass kicking by some of them guerrilla fighters over there like Israel just got. Trump better not listen to these people. They don't have the military to play these games, man.
Method of transportation did you have in mind for the Palestinians you're going to forcibly deport? Never to allow them to return. All of these are your words, not mine.
Little Queen.
Were you thinking
underground, man? We're not
cattle trucks? Like the cattle trucks that transported the Jews and others all over Europe during the last Holocaust?
Nazis.
Or ships like the Africans that you had taken across the Middle Passage in chains,
slavery,
to be disgorged on somebody else's territory. Are you going to force march them? In which case, to where? Into the Sinai Desert? That's a desert, by the way, Donald, not the plural of Sinus. There's so much to be unpicked in this one press conference, just one. It leaves me time only to mention what I alone seem to have noticed as the most sinister of gifts. Netanyahu presented Donald Trump with a gold-plated pager and a regular pager. Like the pagers that blew the limbs and the faces of thousands of people in Lebanon in the most widespread act of international terrorism seen in recent decades. This was a warning to you, Donald. Couldn't you see it?
No.
This was him warning you.
This was them threatening Trump and the U.S. government. Not only will they release them Epstein files with all those dirty politicians on it, U.S. politicians, because they caught him in that honey trap. Epstein was definitely working for Mossad. But you want to talk about JFK, it'll be another JFK. These vicious, dirty gangsters not playing. And that's the problem with our politicians. They so bought.
If you were
what if your dirty laundry gotta come out, man? Y'all don't keep on putting us into these situations. Yeah, your life is on the line. They wouldn't sell us out to keep their damn secrets and to keep their life, though.
Of line. If you were in any way to let him down, everything could end up exploding in your face. Colonel Douglas McGrath. And the man who should be in the American government. We'd be better off if he was. Joins us now on the mother of all talk shows. Colonel, welcome back. I don't know quite where to start, so I'll just ask you what you thought of President President Donald Trump's madness in the White House yesterday.
George, I think I am not alone in the shock that I experienced. I was surprised, first of all, and I'm sure you were as well, at the callous disregard for human life that the suggestion represents, that somehow or another, mystically, magically, we're going to remove over 1 million human beings. We're going to erase the place where they are from and their country, their heritage, and establish this thing. Like you, I thought it was incredible. The other part of this is it was hard for me to understand why he did not have his national security advisor at least contact many of the leaders in the Middle East throughout the Islamic world and ask them for their opinion. As it turns out, he didn't do that. So first, demonstrating a callous disregard for life, a complete lack of respect for the people that live in the region. But it was incomprehensible that you would say something like this publicly without first establishing whether or not it made any sense. It doesn't. No one will support it. Saudi Arabia has made that clear. Egypt, Jordan, name it. Everyone has come down and said outrageous. Now he looks foolish as well as not very smart.
Well, that's something that I've been noticing you've been drawing attention to, and I share this view. I mean, Trump's very smart in some respects, but he's nobody's idea of an intellectual. He has no kind of grasp of international politics. I joked earlier, he probably thinks Sinai is the plural of sinus. He's never been in these places. He has no knowledge, really, of the world. And he's therefore either not being advised at all or being poorly advised. I mean, who could have briefed him that blurting all this out yesterday, even if you wanted to achieve it, blurting it all out yesterday in that way was a very, very unwise idea.
No, absolutely. But I think this is a reflection of the people that surround him at the moment. Let's be frank. He is really, in many ways, the prisoner of his donors. When I say donor, I'm talking about people that donated hundreds of millions of dollars to his campaign and extracted promises from him. For instance, Miriam Adelson, $100 million, but you must promise me that the Israelis can annex the West Bank and effectively do to the West Bank what we've seen happen in Gaza. He made these promises. They sent their money in. And now his closest advisors, the people around him, consist of people that are very close to those donors. And they are reminding him of his obligations. I don't think he is the way many other presidents have been. We went through something similar like this with Reagan at one point. And Reagan finally was told by Weinberger, look, send the Californians home. You have to govern now. Forget all that nonsense. You're the president. I don't think anybody has suggested that to him. And I don't think he understands the gravity of the situation. He made some comments about Ukraine, George, regarding the losses there, which were completely outrageous and made no sense, and then turned around and said, well, if you want more aid, give us rare earths. Of course, nobody bothered to tell him that the rare earths that Ukraine possesses are all in eastern Ukraine, underneath the areas where the Russians live, that are now controlled by Russia. Surely somebody would have said something, but they didn't. Surely somebody would have said, well, the Western Ukrainian lands have already been bought up effectively by Cargill, DuPont, and Monsanto, subsidiaries of our friends at BlackRock. He's walking into these things and turning what otherwise might be a useful statement into an ambush in which he looks ridiculous. So if I were in his position, I would fire a lot of people that are working for him right now around him. But then again, you and I don't know. Maybe somebody went in there and said, listen here, boss, I don't think you should do this. This is dangerous. And he threw them out of the office. We just don't know.
Did you feel that Netanyahu was delighted or dismayed by the idea? After all, let's imagine for a minute that this comes off, that Gaza is occupied by the United States armed forces, which is the only way that this could conceivably work, because the Israelis can't occupy it. They've been trying for the last 16 months. Do you think that the idea that what Netanyahu and his gang consider to be a part of Israel, they are ready to allow the Trump family to turn into effectively a casino and a set of condominiums? Was he taken by surprise by this, in your view?
No, I don't think he was taken by surprise. In fact, if you look at the picture of the two of them in the Oval Office, he's on, our friend Netanyahu is on the left, and he's grinning like the proverbial Cheshire cat. He's obviously delighted. And he's looking across at this old man who's practically saying verbatim whatever he wants him to say. If anything, I think Netanyahu is practicing American foreign policy through ventriloquy. He's simply moving Trump's mouth, and Trump is saying what he wants him to say. And that is, unfortunately, tragically, the perception in the United States, that Trump is not a free actor, that he is simply a puppet. And the puppet master is Netanyahu.
It is quite extraordinary, to the extent that there's video, I've seen it, you will have too, of Trump actually pulling his chair out, having him sat down and then pushing his chair in like you would do to your good wife. This is the President of the United States practically waiting at table on a visiting politician, moreover, one for whom there's an extant international arrest warrant.
Well, remember that President Netanyahu does not simply represent 6+ million Israeli Jews. He represents Jewish international power and capital. And so he is treated differently for that reason, if none else. It would be a mistake to say that why is President Trump allowing himself to be manipulated or exploited by this man who represents so few people? That's a mistake. This is a larger concentration of capital and power that he represents. And Trump knows that. And he's dependent upon it. He was dependent upon it to get elected. So now he's doing what they elected him to do. The question is, what will Americans do? Americans are usually, George, asleep at the switch. Most Americans don't pay any attention to anything that happens beyond their borders. They're too busy watching football and drinking beer and enjoying life. Are they going to wake up and suddenly recognize this has gone too far? Because I don't think most Americans voted for Donald Trump because they wanted him to move in these directions. They voted for him to deal with the border, to deal with immigration, to deal with inflation, to straighten out, streamline government. These are the things they wanted.
To stop the transition of our kids. See, he's been doing good on that. I heard he banned trans from playing females. All that's good and stuff. This other foolishness we didn't vote for.
What did him do? They're not interested in a war in Ukraine, and I don't think they're interested in a war in the Middle East.
Even less interested in an occupation of Gaza. No good could come of that. And I personally don't believe that this will get past first base. It has united the whole of the Arab world. It has united all but Britain on the European continent against him. It has alienated a substantial number of genuine American firsters, who I saw one today, a pretty hardline right-wing guy who said, am I alone? I don't actually want Gaza. And I think that will be quite a considerable constituency, that one. So I don't actually see it going anywhere. But what it now does, if you want to look on the bright side, if America owns Gaza, that means Netanyahu cannot go back to wholesale bombardment of Gaza. He's now going to be bombing Donald Trump's territory.
I don't think so. I think, in fact, as soon as the ceasefire is over, large numbers of those 2,000-pound bombs that President Trump could have kept from the Israelis that have been released to them will absolutely be used to finish up Gaza. And eventually, I think he'll turn his attention to the West Bank. But more important, I think he'll double down on war with Iran. The one thing that Netanyahu is worried about is Donald Trump's predisposition to find a way to cut a new deal with Iran. Because Donald Trump, as confused as he appears to be right now, and as foolish as some of these statements have been, I know him. He does not want a war with Iran under any circumstances. The problem is he's no longer in control. And that should have been obvious from the footage that came out of the Oval Office. Netanyahu has the initiative, and Netanyahu wants that war. If he doesn't get that war, he has no chance of accomplishing any of the goals that he set for himself in Israel. The Greater Israel Project will fail because he's also got Turks to his north now on a border with him. he's got to be very careful what he undertakes with the Turks. They are by no means friendly to him. So either he acts and he destroys Iran with our help, or he's probably lost and won't last in office.
Well, the Iranian president says he wants to meet with President Trump. Trump already said he wants to meet with him. Trump seems to be doubling down on the stance that Iran can have a nuclear program, but it cannot have nuclear weapons. Iran, somewhat to my surprise, still say they neither have nor want nuclear weapons. You've got the basis of a deal there, don't you, with Iran?
I think that the hostility to Iran is irrational and unnecessary. It's similar to the irrational hostility to Russia, George. Iran is a great power, a great nation. It's a civilization that is coming back very strongly in that part of the world. We should have good relations with them. They are eminently approachable. They are not all crazy. This is not a quote-unquote mullah-dominated theocracy anymore. In fact, people that go to Iran and spend time there make it clear to me that the mosques in Iran are practically empty most of the time. That whatever enthusiasm there was for this radical religious Khomeiniism is long since vanished and vaporized. So I think there really is. The sticking point, of course, for us is Israel. And this is something that Israeli government has insisted upon. And that's what Netanyahu wants. And obviously, thus far, President Trump has delivered. Like you, I'm a little concerned that we could be trapped into something that we otherwise would never do. That's my concern. And there are all sorts of ways where we could become involved long before we show up and do anything in Gaza, because you and I know what he's talked about. First of all, it's not going to happen. And then secondly, if we tried to do it, it would take years. This is not going to happen quickly by any means. So the great danger now is the ceasefire ends, the bombing starts, more people are killed, and something triggers the war with Iran. We're not out of the woods on that one.
Finally, Colonel, and I'm grateful as always for your time. I wanted Trump to win for one reason and one reason only. I felt that he, unlike Harris, would derail the express train headed for World War III in Ukraine. And yet, and you've touched on this, increasingly Trump advances proposals for an end to the war in Ukraine that equally don't make any sense, like the rare earth one that you just mentioned. He stopped the supply of weapons to Ukraine for a weekend, but it has, as I read you say, it has restarted again. There's no halt to the bombs and missiles going from US depots to Ukraine. Is he going to let us down even on that one?
There's clearly no coherent strategy. There was no coherent strategy on the part of Biden, unless you want to equate strategy with embroil ourselves in conflict as often and as much as possible. So there is no coherent strategic approach to anything. I think you have a struggle. The struggle is inside Donald Trump. On the one hand, he's surrounded by the wrong people, George, who are giving him bad information and pushing him down the same road that Biden went. On the other hand, you have the inner Donald Trump. His instincts are not bad. They're usually pretty good. And he knows we don't want a war with anybody. We don't need it. Nobody really wants a war with us. That's nonsense. We have big problems in the Western Hemisphere, big problems on our border, problems in our cities, problems with immigration. He knows that. And that's where we need to focus right now, not in the Middle East and not in Eastern Europe and Ukraine. And I think he understands that, but he's struggling because he's got so many people around him who are pushing him in the wrong direction. And then he says, well, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I should do. Perhaps he doubts himself. I think international relations is tough for him. I think he has a much easier time domestically when he talks about economics, although I don't support this passionate approach to tariffs. I think that the time for that sort of thing is over, and it's not going to work. But at least he's thought some of that through. I don't think anything we've discussed thus far, George, has been thought through by him clearly.
Well, every 72 hours, he's declared war on somebody else. usually against his own allies. He's going to run out of places that America can take over.
Everyone, welcome to another very incredible live stream tonight. It's your host Danny Haifong. I'm just going to introduce the program because we have actually a mega panel discussion tonight that is going to, I think, really give you really give you an insight into an analyst himself, a former CIA analyst, as well as geopolitical analyst today. Ray, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks, Danny.
And then we have Larry Johnson, geopolitical analyst and author. Larry, thanks so much for coming on today.
Yep, I put the scream in live stream.
Everyone, as we get started, please do hit the like button. That helps boost this live stream in YouTube's algorithm. But let us get started. I wanted to begin, of course, with Donald Trump and his meeting with Benjamin Netanyahu that shook the world after comments that he made both during his presser with Benjamin Netanyahu as well as afterward. Here is just one of the comments he had during his time with Benjamin Netanyahu. We're just going to take a listen to his Gaza takeover plan. Here it is.
The only reason the Palestinians want to go back to Gaza is they have no alternative. It's right now a demolition site. This is just a demolition site. Virtually every building is down. They're living under fallen concrete that's very dangerous and very precarious. They instead can occupy all of a beautiful area with homes and safety, and they can live out their lives in peace and harmony instead of having to go back and do it again. The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it too. We'll own it and be responsible for dismantling all of the dangerous unexploded bombs and other weapons on the site, level the site and get rid of the destroyed buildings, level it out, create an economic development that will supply unlimited numbers of jobs and housing for the people of the area. Do a real job, do something different.
The people of the area, meaning the Israelis. This is really disgusting. It's going to provide jobs. What the hell is this dude talking? Boy, the small hats got real power.
Go back. It's going to end up the same way it has for 100.
Got this man making a fool of himself.
So I wanted to just play that before I play the next clip. I'll kick it to you first, Scott. Talk about these comments in the context of both the geopolitical reality here and what we've actually just witnessed over the last 15 months. And, you know, we're in the middle of a ceasefire. Benjamin Netanyahu comes to Washington, and then suddenly Trump makes these comments, which seem to they've not only shocked the world because this is literal ethnic cleansing being proposed, but it comes on the heels of a ceasefire, which has causes to it. And I'm curious if you would talk about the realities behind the spin here.
Well, gee, thanks. Danny, I think everybody agrees on at face value, what Trump said is so unrealistic as to be unbelievable. You can't believe that a rational actor would give voice to literal ethnic cleansing, the theft of land. Never once did he talk about the ownership of the land that belongs not to the United States, not to Israel, but to the people of Palestine, the Gazan people. So this would be theft on an unimaginable scale. There's no congressional support for this. I mean, the president, you know, what he could just go around and just designate territories around the world. He's not a king. He's not an emperor. He's a president. So when I looked at this, I mean, when I first heard this, I don't know if people read my Twitter. I was up all night. I couldn't sleep because it was just like, this is so ridiculous. And so I was just banging out, you know, criticism of this. But at some point in time, you know, as an analyst, you got to step back and go, what really is going on here? Because you've got to look at rational, you know, explanations for this. And I don't know if there is a rational explanation, but I'll put it this way. You mentioned 15 months of fighting. Israel was at war with Hamas for 15 months. Israel tried to take over Gaza for 15 months. Israel got their asses handed to them by Hamas for 15 months, and Israel withdrew from Gaza under pressure because their military could no longer sustain the fight. And I bring that up because if you're Donald Trump and you're becoming president and your goal and objective is to create Middle East peace, that's what he says it is. And you're looking at the Gaza problem, and now you're bringing Netanyahu over to talk about the Gaza problem. One would logically think, and most presidents would say, what's Israel's plan? But the fact is, Israel doesn't have a plan, not a plan at all. And into this vacuum steps Donald Trump with a plan so audacious, so ridiculous, so absurd that it can't be ignored. If you saw Netanyahu, and the thing that got me thinking this way is just watching Netanyahu's body language, he was not happy about any of this. This is a man who is gripping the podium, looking at the president almost, I mean, just going, what the hell is he talking about here? He was insulted. He's the prime minister of Israel, being told by the president of the United States on national TV, the whole world watching, that he's incompetent. He can't do the job. He can't finish the job. I, Donald Trump, am going to do the job. Now you'll say, but is Donald Trump's solution a solution? Of course not. On the face of it, not. But who is Donald Trump? Again, Ray's the one who taught me to think like this, to dig a little bit deeper. Donald Trump's not a diplomat. He's not a statesman. He's a New York State real estate businessman. And when you sit down with a real estate businessman in New York to talk business, somebody puts an offer on the table. The people that say no are kicked out of the room. You're not part of the game anymore. He's looking for a counter offer. And I think that's what, because this is so ridiculous, so illegal, so impossible. It's literally impossible for him to do what he says he's doing. He can't do it. He's put an offer out there, and he's challenging the people not just to say no, but to say, hey, no, this is so crazy. We got to come up with something, because there has been no solution to Gaza. This is my guess. I'm just guessing. I'm spitballing because it's the only thing that allows me to believe that there's sanity in the White House. Because if I'm wrong on this and Donald Trump actually believes he can do this, then we are literally being governed by a madman, by an insane man who is dangerous, not just for the world, but for the American people. And it's something that we have to reflect on. I don't want to believe that that's the case right now. So I'm going with, parsing this out, thinking that Donald Trump is simply look, this is a man, you know how he opened up his gambit for North Korean dialogue? Rocket Man, fire and fury. I'm going to nuke the Korean Peninsula, take them all down. Next thing you know, he's walking across the DMZ, shaking hands with Kim Jong-un. How did you get from A to Z? He's a man of extremes. And so I'm just hoping that this is just a case of Donald Trump challenging the world to come up with a different solution. If you don't want this to happen, because Trump has literally told the Israelis, you're no longer the solution. You are the problem. And he cut them right out. There is no Israel. Did you notice that? Where did Israel fit in Donald Trump's plan for Gaza? Nowhere. Nowhere. Not there. Why? Because they can't be trusted, because they can't do the job, because they fail to do the job. Yeah, we can parse that. We know who dropped the buildings. We know whose bombs those were. We know. I just think Donald Trump's statement to the public was so ridiculous that it can't be real. It literally can't be real. It has to be a ridiculous opening gambit to generate dialogue amongst Europe, the Saudi Arabia and everybody else, for them to come up with an alternative to America committing suicide in Gaza, because that's what it would be. We would lose this war. I know there's a bunch of chest thumpers out there, and look, I'm a Marine. I know for a fact we could go in and we would kill Hamas. It's what we do. We do it better than anybody else in the world. But we will lose a lot of Marines. And I remind people, we killed a lot of Vietnamese. Period. We're pretty good at that too. Killed a lot of Koreans. Hell, we killed a lot of Iraqis. We killed a lot of Afghanis. We lost every one of those wars. Lost every single one of them. And we can roll into Gaza and kill a bunch of Gazans. We're going to lose that war. Why? Because it's an unjust war. Because the military activity doesn't align with a legitimate political outcome. And they have to. They have to align, or else you lose the conflict. War is an extension of politics by other means. So this notion that we're going to go into Gaza and fix this thing, no, we're not. And I think Trump has to know this. I don't think there's a military person in uniform that's telling them this is a good idea, boss. I'm like, we're on board. I don't think I think they're all saying exactly what I'm saying. We don't want to do this. Don't order us to do this. If you guys remember the history in Iraq, the Marine general, I can't remember his name right now, during Fallujah, when the Blackwater guys got zapped and dragged through and hung up and burned, he went to the president and he said, we got this under control. We have videotape. Special forces are tracking these guys. We're going to get all the guys that did this, bring them in, and we're going to shut this thing down. Do not order us to go into Fallujah. It will be a nightmare. He said, we'll do it, but you won't like the outcome. You won't like what we're going to do. You weren't going to like how we do this. And then the other thing he said is, if you send us into Fallujah, don't stop us. Once you say go, we go. And you know what the president did? Sent him into Fallujah. And a couple of days later, he went, holy shit, the Marines are being Marines. Stop. You can't have this. It was a disaster. That's what will happen in Gaza. I don't know what Trump thinks is going to happen, but the military will say, don't send us in. But if you do send us in, don't stop us. Because once we start, it's going to get ugly really quick and stay ugly until the job's done. In about a weekend, when the bodies are coming in and the video is horrible, and Americans are watching Americans kill innocent civilians and blow things up, and Americans come out bloody and dying, the uproar is going to be crazy, and Trump's going to go, stop. And the military is going to say, we warned you. We told you what's going to happen. And now you're stopping it, and that's the defeat. That's what's going to happen. There will be no. And so I don't believe this is a serious plan. It's not who's going to invest in it? Look at the stupidity of what he said. We're going to go in there and remove all those unexploded ordnance. No, you're not. You have no idea how to even begin that. How do you do rubble removal? Where are you going to take the rubble? You're going to, is this going to be Berlin all over again, where you build a giant, a giant rubble mountain and then put a SIGINT site on top of it? Donald Trump literally has no plan. He doesn't know what he's talking about. And I think this is deliberate. I think he doesn't like Netanyahu. That's the other thing people need to understand. He doesn't like Netanyahu. He's the guy that put out, let the videotape of
Jeffrey Sachs.
Jeffrey Sachs.
Jeffrey Sachs criticized. Why would Trump do that? Because Trump hates Netanyahu, despises Netanyahu. Trump, this was about jamming it to Netanyahu and then challenging the Saudis are on the fence. If you're Donald Trump, think about it. No Arab country is here to help you. No Arab country cares about the people of Gaza. I mean, Yemen, apparently, the Houthi do. Lebanon, what are they? Shia, the Shia of Iraq. So the Shia care about the Muslim Brotherhood in Gaza more than the Sunni Arabs do. No Sunni Arab nation is lining up to say, we're with the Palestinians. Even the Palestinians aren't with each other. Abu Mazen is undercutting Hamas every day. He is so jealous that Hamas won. He's so angry that Hamas won. He wanted Hamas destroyed because he's an Israeli tool. The Palestinians are split. The Arab world won't support. And so Trump's basically saying, if you guys don't step up to the plate, this is what's going to happen. It's not going to happen, but he's maybe doing the Richard Nixon madman theory. Who knows? But I don't know. This is just my desperate attempt to try and bring some sort of rational framework around the insanity that we all heard last night.
Larry, I wanted to pass it to you, and in the context of what was just said, there's one, like, what message is being sent to who. There's always this, well, is he trying to parse out a deal to pressure actors? Well, it's hard to know what, for me, like, who these actors would be, given that the proposal completely excluded Palestinians altogether, which you would think that would be number one, who would be part of a deal of what to do about post-genocide Gaza. But then there's also, I wanted to ask you, Larry, about the reality that Scott just laid out, if you could flesh out too.
Sure.
Shalom.
In my opinion, Israel just lost pretty significantly militarily. And now the United States is saying they're going to go in with an unbelievable kind of posture into Gaza and escort all the Palestinians out. That's what it sounded like to me. So, Larry, your reaction.
Well, first, Trump sort of blew up the settler narrative. This land is our land. God gave this land to me. Nope. Trump's taken part of it over. It's American land now. That's what he was saying. So he was not acknowledging in that the Zionists would have control. He was actually, in a way, sending a pretty bizarre message. And I think Scott's observation about Bibi Netanyahu's body language is accurate. The other thing to remember is this was entirely scripted. Trump was normally Trump's not reading from a note card or reading from a teleprompter. He was reading from a note card. This had been prepared in advance. Who wrote that up? Jared Kushner, for his real estate investment, maybe. But this is part. I chalk this up also to, Trump's showmanship. I'd encourage everybody that's watching now or listening, go Google on YouTube, Donald Trump and Vince McMahon. The time that Trump appeared in the ring at a World Wrestling Federation event and, was breaking chairs over people's heads and, throwing sucker punches. There is also, I'll call it, I don't want to suggest that this is lighthearted entertainment, but Trump was saying some things there that, both simultaneously on some side takes heat off of Netanyahu at home, who's politically, he's made promises to, skip the first phase of the ceasefire and violate the second phase. In sort of a bizarre way, I think what Trump was doing was trying to buy time. Now, so yeah, no, we're going to take Gaza over. We'll resettle it. We'll move all the Palestinians out. And what's Netanyahu going to do? Go back and say Trump's a liar? That's not going to happen. Trump, no, he can't say that. It was sort of an odd way that Trump boxed Netanyahu in. The other thing I noticed was just the contrast between the appearance of Donald Trump, who's 4 years older than Netanyahu. Netanyahu looks like a sick man. He does not look healthy. He's had, Ray McGovern's way older than Bibi Netanyahu and looks far better than Bibi Netanyahu. Bibi Netanyahu would like to look like Ray McGovern. But so there's some health issues there with Netanyahu. So, and then the practical thing, Trump keeps saying, oh, yeah, I've talked to the other Arab nations and they're all on board. And today, Turkey was out saying, hell no, forget that. MBS in Saudi Arabia was going, he learned to speak Russian. He goes, niet means niet. It's not going to happen. And it's only going to happen if there's a Palestinian state. So, I don't know what Trump has up his sleeve. You saw today he walked it back a little bit because it's an idea that's not fleshed out. And as Scott correctly noted, he's not in a position to send U.S. troops in there because that would be a bloodbath. And all of a sudden he's going to be bringing home body bags and greeting them at Dover. He doesn't want that image at all. Maybe I'm jumping ahead, but this was, like I said, this was all scripted. All of his pontification about Iran. Boy, Iran, if you're building that nuke, we're going to get you. Well, we already know that the Ali Khamenei hasn't given them the green light to build a bomb. Until Ali Khamenei says go, it's not going to happen. And on January 17th, they signed a deal with Russia, where Russia's vowing to help in the nuclear industry, but that comes with a clause that's not publicized. That means you don't get to develop a nuke. We're going to work with you. It's going to be peaceful, no nukes. So I think we need to step back and, it's easy to say, oh, Donald Trump's a moron. He's an idiot. I keep going back to the Vince McMahon. He's a showman. He's an entertainer in his own little world, and it's worked for him so far. And I think he's in some aspects what he said at that podium actually ends up limiting what Bibi Netanyahu can do going forward, not starting a new war.
Ray, what do you think about this? Because on the one hand, I definitely hear that and could conceive that this plan is absolutely ridiculous and cannot be implemented without disaster for the United States. But on the other hand, we've seen the United States for so long jump into disasters with regard to its assistance to Israel. And while Donald Trump had begun his administration maybe moving away from that with the implementation of the ceasefire, there's still questions about, well, will actually the United States go for this? Ray, what is your assessment?
I think one needs to be aware of the background of all of this and the fact that Israel has been leading the U.S. into all manner of catastrophes. It's very clear now that they were the principal element in persuading the Bush-Cheney administration and the intelligence community to falsify enough information to justify the attack on Iraq. Now, Scott mentioned Fallujah. What many people don't remember is that was a direct result of the killing of a paraplegic, blind sheikh named Yassin, the spiritual leader of Hamas in Gaza in March 2004. He was killed by an Israeli helicopter, and Sharon was known to have been behind that. Okay, the spiritual leader of Hamas. So why is that relevant? Well, it was just 10 days later that those contractors, what was their name? The kind of contractors we had there.
It was Blackwater, wasn't it?
The Blackwater guys, yeah. There were 4 or 5 of them, and they misread the map and they made the wrong turn, and they ended up in the hands of people who really feel serious about killing the spiritual leader of Hamas. And what happened to them, I don't defend that at all, okay? But that was at the bottom of it. And when those people dragged those Blackwater types through those streets, on the panels of the trucks that they used was Yassin Revenge Brigades. Okay, now Scott mentioned what the Marines were ordered to do against Fallujah. His account, as usual, is extremely accurate. The Marine general later complained privately that this was really terrible and the countermanding this thing. He lost several Marines. The Marine commanders worth their salt don't like that, okay? But what happened? Well, actually, how'd he end up? He became the commandant of the Marine Corps. So that too is kind of unpleasant, because if you keep your mouth shut in public, then you become promoted, not demoted. Now, as far as my God, Trump is concerned, you know what the meaning of the word sociopath is? Okay, that's what we have here: a person who has no empathy, no feeling for anyone else. Okay, and he's standing right next to a fellow sociopath, okay? And not only that, a racist. Now, I was hoping that when Trump made that eloquent presentation about what happened to Gaza, all of them know beyond repair, terrible. And that guy did it. you know, that was McGovern dreaming. He didn't say that guy did it. Okay, so what we have here is a real complicated situation where I think Trump has got what the Germans call Wahnsinn. Okay, it means it's worse than verrückt. It's kind of a delusion of grandeur, a feeling of omnipotence, and that he can do whatever the hell he wants, all right, and nobody's going to stop it. I'm less encouraged at the prospect that our Congress or anyone else in our government can stop this. I wish I had more confidence, but I don't. And I know very well what happened in early 1933 in Berlin. And that was when people could not find their voice. There was no moral leadership. Not the Catholics, not the Lutheran bishops would say a damn word, okay? And what happened, of course, is described by one person who was there, a lawyer training to be a judge. He said there was sheepish submissiveness. Hitler didn't have anywhere near a majority. What happened? The Social Democrats caved. The Christian Center Party caved. And before you knew it, everybody was too afraid to do a damn thing about what was happening to the Jews. That's history, folks. It's not so long ago. I was alive during those years. I never thought that our country would be responsible not only for genocide, but for enabling a psychopath like Netanyahu to try to get away with what he wants to get away with. I am encouraged, in a sense, to hear Scott and Larry say he's not really going to get away with it because the cards are stacked against him. Hamas is not going to be a shrinking violet. So those are my thoughts. I just feel really bad about the fact that we, this is on us. If we're a democracy, cry the beloved country, for God's sake. That was a novel about South Africa, okay? And we have Bishop Tutu telling us, look, you can't remain neutral when this kind of thing is going on. Remaining neutral is being on the side of the oppressor. If the elephant has his foot on a little mouse in the jungle, the mouse does not very much appreciate it if you remain neutral. And so I just hope that there's more spine, there's more moral fiber in the American public that can stand up against this than there was in Germany in early 1933.
Yeah, wise words, Ray. And to get back to you, Scott, what Trump said is definitely hard to believe. Hard to believe it was said so openly. But at the same time, the difficulty for me is how can we trust Donald Trump at this point, given the fact that we know that we have this long history of what just happened in Gaza, and we also have what seems to me a big willingness from Donald Trump to make deals that could very well and will likely be beneficial to Israel in the long run. And so my question, Scott, we've heard, we have all this speculation about, well, what's going to happen. But I'd like you to also if you could get into, you mentioned briefly the realities on the ground. Could you talk about, when I think about the United States getting into this and the way that Trump proposes, I don't only think about Hamas either. I think about the entirety of what we just saw in the last 15 months, where there was a regional war escalating. There was resistance everywhere from Lebanon to Yemen, etc. That won't simply go away if the United States does this will it? I mean, what's your thoughts about if the U.S. decides to go all in this way? What would be the consequences more broadly? Because Hamas certainly will kick ass, but it seems like it would be even bigger than that.
You said Hamas will kick ass?
Yeah, they will, but it will be even bigger than just what happens on the ground in Gaza.
Don't go there, Dan. Okay, no one's going to kick our ass. Okay, we can lose politically, but please don't ever imply there's a military force capable of kicking America's ass. It's just unbelievable, and we don't want to go there. No one's going to kick our ass. Okay, it's the Israeli Defense Force is not the United States military. Okay, it's not that good. It's a bunch of conscripts poorly trained. The United States military is a far different machine, and so we don't even want to go down the path that Hamas is going to. No one's going to kick our ass, and that's the tragedy.
Hamas will in them tongues.
We didn't lose tactical engagements in Iraq and Afghanistan. We won virtually every single one of them. And that's what will happen to Hamas. We will win every tactical engagement. We'll lose some casualties, but it will go our way because we have overwhelming force. We can bring more force to bear than Israel ever could think about bringing to bear because we have a bigger military. We have a better military. We have better weapons. We have better trained troops. Our troops are so much better trained than the Israelis. We don't even want to consider this option. And the military doesn't want to consider this option. First of all, it would take a tremendous amount of military resources. This wouldn't be a cakewalk. We would have to, bring in a lot of resources that would weaken us around the world. We're not what we used to be. We can't fight 2.5 wars anymore. And this would become a major conflict. One of the reasons why we ended up getting out of Afghanistan, out of Iraq, and why we're going to pull out of Syria is that it's a resource drain. Getting involved in the conflict in Gaza isn't just about, sending in, we're talking multiple brigades going in. We're probably talking about a Marine division, and we're probably talking about the equivalent of another 2.5 Army divisions going in to fight. Now, then you have to rotate these people in. So that Marine division has to have another division. Now you've taken 2/3 of the Marine Corps and you've allocated it to Gaza. But in reality, you're probably all three because the other one on standby is going to be looking at that rotation. This is a huge resource drain. This is what the military is going to tell the president: is we can do this if you want to do this. It'll be horrible, but it will absorb so much of our capacity that if China decided to have a go at Taiwan, we have very few options left. If God forbid, Russia decided to go at the Baltics, we got no options left. We can't do everything. And you want to take on Iran as well? We don't have those options. I mean, this is the one thing they'll be saying. Where does Gaza fit into the national security of the United States? When you list all of the problems that the United States is facing out there, from Trump saying we don't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon. Well, that has a potential military aspect there. How do we secure the Strait of Hormuz? Things of that nature. Taiwan and China, there's a military thing there. South China Sea, the Philippines, the whole 3rd Marine Division has been retrained as a littoral fighting force. You're going to pull them out to Gaza. Gaza doesn't even register on the map of national security priorities. So there's this. The Secretary of Defense, when he takes a look at the guidance he's given the military, Gaza's nowhere to be found on that map. Nowhere. So we don't want to talk about Hamas kicking ass and all this, because that's just taking us down the wrong path. We have to talk about the strategic posture of the United States globally. And Gaza doesn't fit anywhere. And yet, if we were to go into Gaza, it would suddenly suck the resources needed to deal with all of these other issues. So this is, I don't want to get into a military discussion because it's heading down the path. It just simply isn't going to happen, Danny. There's no way the United States is going to war in Gaza. No way. We could run limited hostage rescue missions. I mean, that, we could do stuff like that, but we are not putting a Marine division across the beach. We are not putting an Army division on the ground. It just isn't going to happen because, again, as I said, Larry knows this too, and Ray, If I have a division on the ground, I got to have a division training to replace it. We got to rotate that division out. And that means I have to have another division out. That's a 3-division task. Whenever you put troops in there, if you're talking about, that's why I talk about in Ukraine, they say we're going to put 60,000 peacekeepers, 100,000 peacekeepers. Well, you're talking about 300,000 man commitment minimum. Plus, you got to put the other 80,000 out there who are doing the logistics, sustainability of all that. So to put 100,000 people on the ground is a 380,000 person commitment. And so when you start talking about putting divisions on the ground, because this is a multi-division task here, you're just sucked out the whole strength of America. And then what happens? North Korea and South Korea decide to hook and jab. Where are we getting the brigades to do that? China and Taiwan, they ain't got nothing. South Pacific, nothing. The Europe, nothing. Iran, nothing. Africa, nothing. Oh God, wait a minute. We want to invade the Panama Canal. Nothing. We've just taken all our forces out and thrown them into Gaza, which doesn't register as any level on our national security priorities. So we really shouldn't be talking about the military at all, because it just literally isn't going to happen.
Yeah, and I want Ray, before I kick it to you, I just want to clarify. When I said the comment, Hamas will kick ass, what I meant was actually kind of what you said, Scott, which is that it would be a quagmire. They would be bogged down. It would stretch the U.S. And also even just the proposal of what Trump said, well, we're going to move everybody. It insinuates that the United States will. Who else is the United States going to say? They have to say Palestinians are going to fight back. They don't want to leave, which means there will be a fight. So, but I just wanted to clarify that because while certainly the U.S. Military, as you stated, Scott, has superiority in so many areas, that point about being outstretched and overstretched is really deep on the minds. But Ray, I know you wanted to come in here. Oh, sorry, everybody. Hold on. All right, there you go. You're good now.
Yeah. You can hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Devil's advocate, and I'm sure Scott doesn't mind this. We do this all the time. Iraq didn't fit into what we thought were national threats to our security. Afghanistan, no. Ukraine, no. Is China going to take Taiwan by force? No. Is Russia going to invade Europe? No. There are smart enough people in the Defense Department to know all this. And so if the president in his wisdom says, look, you're going to do this, are there enough people at higher ranks in the Defense Department and this new Secretary of Defense to say, Mr. President, we can do it, but there's this, that, and the other thing, and well, maybe it's not a good idea. Is there? I don't know. Okay, what you got is a bunch of sycophants. Now, here's an example. Okay, the people in Gaza are starving. Okay. The trucks lined up by the thousands, and I do not exaggerate, with foodstuffs are not being led into Gaza, okay? Netanyahu says, no, they can't do that. So what does President Biden do? Instead of calling him up and say, look, starvation is a war crime, let those trucks in, he says to his Corps of Engineers, hey, Corps of Engineers, you're really good at building. Yeah, that's a good idea. Build a pier. Build a pier so that we could transport these foodstuffs from Cyprus and put them on a pier, and then what? Will they be able to get in? Will Netanyahu like it? Well, let's give it a try. So, what does the Corps of Engineers, the Corps of Engineers, a very proud tradition. Okay, they said, yes, sir, even though they knew the damn thing would wash away in about a month, which it did. Now, that's an example of how the military in these days respond to the president. So I'm less certain, and Scott is, that if the president said something really stupid, like we're going to send this Marine division or these battalions into Gaza to help out the Israelis, I'm not sure that they would have the guts or the common sense to say, Now we can't do that because we have these other threats. They might say, well, these other threats have been blown up for obvious purposes. We can do this. They always say, can do, Mr. President. That's what I'm afraid of.
Can I just say something about the pier? It wasn't ever a logistics operation, right? It was a special operation. It was an intelligence collect operation. The pier was a front for putting intelligence capabilities and special operations capabilities forward together in joint operation with the Israelis. And it fulfilled its mission because in the end of the day, humanitarian trucks came off the pier loaded with Israeli commandos guided by American intelligence to carry out a raid. That was the whole purpose of the pier. The pier was never a logistics thing. So the military actually did its job. The military was told to put up a cover, a front, and to position, collect intelligence that could guide special operators into carry out a hostage rescue mission, which they did. But this was never about the Corps of Engineers coming in and building a supply thing, because no Corps of Engineer guy would have said that makes sense. That's why I knew. I mean, the moment they did this, I knew exactly what it was, because I happen to believe that the U.S. military has competent officers who would say, Mr. President, this is stupid. But if they said, no, what we need is a cover story. We need to create, a cover story to do intelligence collection, all that. That's what happened.
It's still stupid.
Yeah. Sure, but there's a different kind of stupid.
Okay.
Yeah, Larry, I want to get you in here about your thoughts on what we've been talking about, because it still stands for me that if there is, and I think what Ray was saying was very prescient in terms of, the United States sometimes does things, a lot of times does engages in foreign policy that isn't always in its interests, especially when it comes to Israel. Do you find that, do you agree with Scott that there is no way that such a thing like this could happen? And if it does, if any kind of action of displacing Palestinians does occur, it seems like that would reignite what we've been witnessing over the last 15 months, which was not only a genocide in Gaza, but also a regional war that has nearly led to war, Israel and Iran, Hezbollah, all of this. What do you say?
Well, let's recognize what happened to the Israeli ground forces in this invasion of Gaza and this genocide that took place. They experienced some of the same psychological phenomena that afflicted the German Wehrmacht that was operating in Poland and Ukraine. I mean, one of the reasons that they led to creating these extermination camps in Poland was because the officers, the Wehrmacht officers, and we're not talking SS, we're talking, just regular army, they were dealing with soldiers who were psychologically suffering from killing women and children. And lo and behold, in Israel today, you've got a significant problem with suicides among Israeli reservists that have served, and they were ordered to shoot children, ordered to kill women. And while there are some psychopaths within them, there are a number that were suffering from that and refused actually to go back. And if the United States, if Trump decided to actually try to insert military force, and I don't think he is or even planning to do so, because I remind you of what Scott said at the outset. Remember Trump's rhetoric, the public stuff he was saying about Kim Jong-un, just extreme off the wall. And then all of a sudden it was all diplomacy and he's meeting face to face. Let's look at the facts that we have, at least over the last month. Trump's intervention via Steve Witkoff brought the ceasefire into effect. While it may not be a perfect ceasefire, it has achieved the release of 12 Israeli hostages. Most of them were women. They were women soldiers. And the images that created went to the benefit of Hamas. and to the detriment, and created problems in Israel. Alistair Crook has talked about that pretty extensively, because instead of these three women showing up on stage looking terrified, looking beaten, looking emaciated, in fact, they were almost glowing. They were smiling. The one video produced with the four Israeli, the female soldiers, the former hostages, in a car, all speaking Arabic and saying "Shukran," thank you. That, it's tough to build the meme that all of these Hamas are ruthless monsters who are raping, beheading, and killing. It countered that narrative, and so Bibi, remember his reaction to the ceasefire. He's telling the Ben Gavirs and the Smotrich, okay, yeah, we're doing this right now because we're under pressure. But once Trump is in, we're going to rip the scab off and screw that second phase. Trump doesn't want to see the second phase go away. Now, I want us to, I think we should not ignore the fact that Trump was reading that yesterday. Now, Trump didn't sit down and write that himself. And, Ray and Scott know how papers that wind up in the hands of a president, those end up getting staffed somewhere. So I don't know who was who came up with this idea thinking this would be a good thing to do. But it wasn't just an extemporaneous moment of Trump freewheeling it. This was a prepared statement. Now, the other fact we need to look at this that at least is in the news, and it's not getting a lot of coverage, is Witkoff is talking to the Iranians. So on the one hand, Trump's, Iran, we're going to kill you, and then Witkoff is talking to Iran, and Iran wants a peace deal. And Trump also wants a deal with Saudis, but the Saudis have been very clear. There's got to be a solution for the Palestinians, and that doesn't mean moving them to Jordan, Egypt, or Saudi Arabia. So I think I fully understand why Ray is alarmed and sickened by this, because that was when I heard that last night. My reaction was like Scott's and Ray's. I was good God, what's he thinking? But then as I stepped back and started thinking this through, recognizing that these are, if you will, opening positions in a negotiation. And Trump has always shown he backs away from the extreme positions. I mean, look what happened with have you seen the t-shirt? I survived the 24-hour tariff war.
Right.
They didn't even get off the ground. They didn't even have time to boost the price of tequila coming out of Mexico. So, it was some of this is a lot of it's political theater, and it may be disturbing. I fully, I'm sure Ray's his discomfort over that. But I really think part of what's going on here, and I may be wrong. It wouldn't be the first time, but I think that part of that was theater in order to prevent Netanyahu from going back and placating the Ben Gavirs and the Smotriches by tearing up the second part of this the ceasefire. I think Trump wants to keep that intact and is going to maybe say some things that will be alarming on this side in order to placate the Israelis. But the bottom line is, if you're going to insert military, you're looking at it's going to take weeks or months to create that force. They're not just standing there on the tarmac, geared up, ready to hop on the airplane, because the logistics train that has to be put in place is significant. And then you get to the basic problem of they're not attacking the Japanese on Iwo Jima. They're going to be killing women and children. And these soldiers have been trained not to do that. At least if we got good officers, and good officers aren't going to stand by and let that happen.
Ray, when Larry was talking about the script, the Times of Israel reported that Jared Kushner might have a lot to do with this, especially in terms of how this was articulated, right? The Riviera of the Middle East. We're going to do beautiful things with Gaza. So please react to what Larry and Scott have been talking about, and maybe if you could comment on this as well. sorry,
had said those things early on. Okay, this is not new. Could be a Riviera. Could be really nice property to develop. Okay, so yeah, he could have gotten some of that. Again, I think it's part of Trump's feeling of exhilaration, having won the election and now having very little opposition anywhere. Okay, now I said sociopath. I would also add racist. And I would also say that obtains for both of those people at those two podiums. That matters. Okay. The world is divided as never before. Take the BRICS with India, China, all kinds of other people with people of color. Okay. The vast majority in population and now in GNP. Okay. Against what would be a good, NATO. What is NATO characteristic for? Well, they're all white, aren't they? So what's happening here matters in terms of public image, public diplomacy, and the fact that a lot of these people out there in the East in the BRICS have been subjected, in Africa, to colonialism and its worst manifestations. Okay. And so I'm thinking now of what we did in Vietnam and how famously James Baldwin wrote to Angela Davis when she was wrapped up for her protesting activity, 1970 it was. He wrote her a letter, okay, when she appeared on the cover of Newsweek, chained, okay. And James Baldwin said, you know, to see you on the cover of Newsweek chained should have touched off nerves in our society, but did not. And this is also what James Baldwin said. I wrote it down because it's very, very succinct. Sister Angela, as long as white Americans take refuge in their whiteness, they will allow millions of other people to be slaughtered, period, end quote. It happens to have been the case. And people looking on in the world realize that to have been the case. The world is divided, people of color against the lily white West. That's even more insidious than what's going on now in Southwest Asia.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to play one final clip and get your reactions to it because while on the one hand, Donald Trump definitely had a script, and there have been a lot of mentions about who is Trump now working for, given how much he placated Israel at this. Larry, you brought up Smotrich, you brought up Ben-Gvir. They are very, very, very happy right now with what Donald Trump said during this meeting.
Have you? I haven't seen any quotes from them. In fact, I'd be shocked that Smotrich would be happy with what Trump said, because he didn't say, "I'm going to ensure that God's promise to Israel is fulfilled and that Israel controls Gaza." He said, "America, we're going to own it." He didn't say that the Jews get it. He said, "America." Right. I'd be surprised. Smotrich, he's a fanatic, and he's going to go, whoa, wait a minute. This land's our land. God, so I'll sing the Exodus song. God gave this land to me. That's what Trump said there. Was sort of a punch in the nose to those Zionist settlers, because they are convinced from the river to the sea, this land God gave to me, and not to these Palestinians, not to anybody else. It's ours. And here's Trump saying, it might be mine, America.
Right. Well, yes, that is what Smotrich in the Times of Israel has reported on this. They are talking about the plan to move Palestinians. They're not commenting. Ben-Gvir and Smotrich. Yeah. I mean, no one is. Netanyahu is not. They're not commenting on the semantics of how Trump framed it, which I'm not saying are not unimportant, because I think there was.
Yeah.
I agree. I think Scott, Larry, I think Trump was saying, this is the US's job. Like, we have to do this now. But what they were so happy about was this idea being floated out by a US president saying, yeah, we're going to move all the Palestinians now, because that's what Israel wants. But I wanted to get your final comments before we move on. I wanted to play, because there was the script that Trump had, but then there also was how he answered the media. And I want to play what he said here. I actually lost everything. Hold on.
Yeah.
Here we go. Hold on. Let me just share this. Okay.
Peter?
What Palestinians have the right to return to Gaza if they left while the rebuilding was happening?
It would be my hope that we could do something really nice, really good, where they wouldn't want to return. Why would they want to return? The place has been hell. It's been one of the meanest, toughest places on earth. And right now, I've seen every picture from every angle, better than if I were there. And nobody can live there. You can't live there. So if we can build them through massive amounts of money supplied by other people, very rich nations, something for them in one of the countries, and it could be Jordan, and it could be Egypt, it could be other countries, and you could build 4 or 5 or 6 areas. It doesn't have to be one area, but you take certain areas and you build really good quality housing, like a beautiful town, like someplace where they can live and not die, because Gaza is a guarantee that they're going to end up dying. The same thing's going to happen again. It's happened over and over again, and it's going to happen again as sure as you're standing there, Peter. So I hope that we could do something where they wouldn't want to go back. Who would want to go back?
So I'll stop it there.
Want to go home?
Scott, I'll get you. I'll get you back in here, Scott. Final comments on this whole situation that we've been talking about.
Palestine belongs to the Palestinian people. Gaza belongs to the Gazan people. Hamas is in control. This is just ridiculous talk. It's insanely stupid, criminally so if he chooses to act on it. And it can't be taken seriously. Nobody will take it seriously. There's not a single aspect of what he said that is implementable. It can't be done. Even if he was the president of the United States and he gives an order, there is nobody capable of following these orders. So it's just a way. It's just a waste of anything. I mean, I can't even speak. This is how I was when I saw the press conference originally, because it took me a while to look at the press conference and try and make sense of it. But this is a level of inanity, nonsensical stupidity that leads me to believe that this is just all one giant smokescreen. That Donald Trump's, I think he's enjoying right now, just creating this fantasy world that he's populating with things that aren't going to happen, because it's just spinning people up. And I think Donald Trump gets off on watching people get upset and get this, and he's thrilled by it, because nothing he says is going to be reality. What he's doing is creating chaos and anarchy, and being disruptive to a system that hasn't been working. And this is the one thing I have to say about a method to his madness. Let's pull off the stupidity of what Trump says, and let's just acknowledge, prior to that press conference, there wasn't a single viable plan on the table being floated anywhere about how to solve the problem in Gaza. Not a single realistic plan being floated by anybody. Nobody was talking about anything. And so now, if you're Donald Trump and you're the president of the United States and you say my mission is to bring peace, he could do it the old-fashioned way, which is shuttle diplomacy, have a Secretary of State run around, fly around, meetings, and nothing will happen, because Israel will never let anything happen. The one encouraging thing on this is, I believe, is the absolute punch in the face to Benjamin Netanyahu. And I think Larry is 100% correct. This is Trump putting a marker on the table saying, you're done in Gaza. And Netanyahu can't act because Trump has now articulated something. If Netanyahu undercuts him, so Trump has checkmated Israel. Now, everybody in the comment, go, $100 million in Adelson's money, this, that, and the other thing. They're the most Zionist thing in the world. None of that matters in the world of Donald Trump. I just have to tell you, it doesn't matter. If he was bought out by Adelson, he wouldn't be doing this. If he was bought out by Adelson, he'd be letting Israel do whatever the hell they want. He'd be giving them all those bombs and saying, bomb away, send in your troops, do whatever you want. But he's not bought out by Adelson. And he punched Netanyahu in the face and he checkmated Israel. And now he's disrupting the entire world saying, if you don't like it, come up with a better idea. And now the world is scrambling right now to come up with a better idea. And again, I'm sickened by everything you said, but that's a hell of a lot better situation than existed during the Biden administration, where nobody was doing anything except sitting back and letting the United States, prevent the world from helping. What has Trump done? Because we haven't talked about this. He's cut UNRWA. I mean, he's withdrawn from the United Nations. The money's gone. Why? Because from his perspective, that just sustained a failure. He is disrupting the whole thing, saying if you want to fund the Palestinians, come up with a different mechanism. And now people will say, well, wait a minute, if I'm going to invest, it has to be to achieve a result. It can't just be about sustaining decades of refugees in Gaza, which is all UNRWA ever did. God bless the people going in there and helping them out. All it did is sustain a concentration camp. That's it. That's all UNRWA ever did, is sustain the concentration camp. And from Trump's perspective, that's a failure. And he doesn't want to do that anymore. So he's disruptive. He's changing everything so that whatever comes forward has to be something new, fresh. And again, we know this. People are going, it's one thing for me to write a check to Medicine Sans Frontier or, the Sierra Club or whatever. It makes me feel good. I'm going to save whatever, the whales. Send a check off. I'm not saving the whales. I'm sending money off to people who have proven they can't save the whales. That's the reality. Funding UNRWA proves nothing other than sustainment of a concentration camp. So now, if you're saying if you want to save the whales, you got to come up with a plan. It's your plan. You got to bring in the people. You got to bring in the money. You got to finance. And now I'm not going to just write a check. I'm going to say, well, wait a minute. If I'm going to invest, I need assurances of what's going to happen. I need a structure. I need a plan. And I think that's what Trump's trying to create here through his madness. At least I hope he is, because otherwise, as I said before, he's gone totally insane. And I don't think he's gone totally insane. I think Trump's playing it. I think Trump's having a great time playing this game. Ray called him a psychopath. Maybe it's this kind of game that psychopaths play. But I just think that he's basically saying what has gone on hasn't worked, and it's not going to work, and we're not going to continue to invest in something that has no chance of working. So wipe the table clean, come up with an audacious opening gambit, fall back, and let's see what people have.
Well, yeah. And I wanted to, there's an interesting contradiction here too, because on the one hand, Trump strips everything naked. I mean, he just says what it is, and what like to even put this out here as he did, articulates actually what has been happening and what was happening under the Biden administration. That was what was the ultimate plan, was to expel the people of Palestine out of there. That's what a genocide does. It's not just kill everyone that moves, even though that's what Israel with U.S. weaponry and assistance was trying to do. But it's also get them out because they want to clear them out. And now Trump is articulating this, which in effect is, one could say it's stupid, psychopathic, and also in some ways informative. But on the other hand, too, it's like, if Trump is going to fall back and say, well, let everyone now take care of this, one, Ray brought it up, what hasn't been mentioned, and we have mentioned it, you said in the beginning, Gaza belongs to the Palestinians, but what has been mentioned in terms of what Trump is saying is the Palestinians themselves, because they are the ultimate decider in reality of what happens in Gaza, and they certainly in Palestine proper, they certainly gave a huge sacrifice to show that much. But Larry, I want to get Larry and Ray's final comments before we move on. I know we have other things to talk about too.
Well, the image that should be maybe filmed, put together, and played for Trump every morning are the Palestinians, almost 1 million of them or more, marching north into Gaza, north into rubble. Yeah, it's horrible, horrible conditions. No decent sewer, no guaranteed clean water, no stores where you can go buy food. And, it's really sort of a testimony to the remarkable strength of the Palestinian people that I can see a lot of folks who had been devastated like they have been, like they've suffered over the last 15 months, would just sit in a tent, totally depressed, crying, losing all hope. These people didn't lose hope. They got up and they were carrying the stuff on their backs, carrying their children, moving forward into, they didn't know what. If nothing else, they were going to try to find and recover the remains of their loved ones. So we cannot and should not ignore that kind of strength. In fact, the Palestinians often are ridiculed as being, just a weak, incompetent people. And I think what we've seen over since the imposition of the ceasefire and their movement north is the exact opposite of that. And that's ultimately what will derail Trump's efforts. We're going to move them off to Egypt and Jordan. I've heard that from, pro-Zionist Christian evangelicals for years. Right. Why don't the Jordanians would say, because this is their home and they're not going to leave their home. And at some point, they're going to get that message across to Trump, I think, that this is our home.
Ray?
Well, I think Larry is right. The resilience of the Palestinians is something to behold. Scott mentioned a psychopath. I said sociopath. They're equally bad. I see them both in Trump. And the problem is, lest they become the new normal. Okay. Now, I haven't read a lot of the Western press over the last day, but I think it could be said that our little panel is very, very different from what has been appearing in the Western press. Okay. And that matters. That matters. Because Americans are woefully uninformed about such important things as this and about Russia and Ukraine and everything else. That really matters. Matter of fact, I think I watched the whole Q&A after Trump made that statement. And there was only one and a woman, okay, who said, well, but President Trump, this is a sovereign country. You're going to take over. And of course, she was cut off. And instead, Peter Alexander would ask him, So that's an uphill battle that we have to fight against. We can't let it become the new normal, okay? Now, with respect to Egypt and Jordan, I was watching Richard Haas today being interviewed by Katie Couric, and he let drop the fact that the king of Jordan and the president of Egypt are due in Washington in a week or so, if I heard him correctly. Now, that's important. These people are people on whom Trump or any other chief executive of the United States has lots and lots of leverage, okay? It's a sticky wicket. I mean, there's a vast majority of people in Jordan who are Palestinians. Are you going to ask the king of Jordan to take still more? What happens to his reign if that happens? That's sticky, but he still depends on the U.S. financing of his regime. Okay, how about Sisi? Sisi is a similar case. There's billions of dollars every year. 4, I think, go to Egypt. Just one less than go to Israel, and he can't exist without our help. So, what's that mean? Well, I don't know what it means. Could Sisi be persuaded? Unlike by Blinken, who tried it the first time a couple of years ago, could Sisi be persuaded to open up the Sinai and accept all our tents from REI? And you know, I don't know, but this is not as as outlandish as one might think. If Trump and the rest of the sociopaths and the psychopaths have their will here and press Sisi to do what they want him to do, even though it might mean suicide for him as well as for the king of Jordan. That really matters, and that's going to play out in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah. Now, I wanted to talk about, we've been talking about Gaza for the first hour or so, and I wanted to talk for the rest of the time about other matters. And I wanted to bring it to Ukraine. Vladimir Putin, Zelensky, everyone is saying they're willing to negotiate right now. Donald Trump says he is speaking to the Russians, or that his administration is. Unclear what that actually looks like at this moment. Supposedly at the Munich Security Conference later this month, there's going to be an unveiling of a peace plan. Unsure if it's going to be the same one that we've kind of had leaked in Newsweek. But I wanted to actually play, we've spoken about, Scott, the whether Putin will actually negotiate with Zelensky. And he said, yes. You corrected me. You said, yes, he will. And I looked this up today. It is very true. Confirmed it. He will negotiate with Zelensky, but he doesn't view him as a legitimate leader because he's not elected. Martial law is still in place. He is not actually the leader until there's an election. And he then won't be legitimately able to sign a document. And now Zelensky had this to say on Piers Morgan. Scott, I want your comment on this. Given the fact that negotiations are being talked about, Zelensky is actually demanding a lot more from the West, which seems to completely undermine any kind of negotiation process. Here is what he had to say.
Which support package, which missiles, will we be given nuclear weapons? Then let them give us nuclear weapons. Will they give us the missiles in the quantities that we can stop Russia? And I'm not sure of that, but I think it would help. Otherwise, what missiles can stop Russia's nuclear missiles? That is a rhetoric question.
So, Scott, I'll kick it to you. He is asking for their nuclear weapons through Western media. That seems to really undermine any kind of negotiation process, so to speak. But then again, this is Zelensky. So, Scott.
You're muted.
Scott, you're muted. Sorry. Okay.
Vladimir Putin will never sit down at the table with Volodymyr Zelensky. Okay, Putin has said that. His government has said that. Putin said, I can pick some people who could sit down at a table that included Zelensky. He's not excluding the fact that Zelensky could sit at a table with some Russians picked by Vladimir Putin. But understand how the Russians work. Zelensky's not legitimate at all. So do you think Sergei Lavrov is going to sit down at a table with Zelensky? No, not anywhere close. These will be such low-level people. And the other thing we need to be clear, Russia will not negotiate. I don't, you see, we have this concept of negotiation being sort of give and take, and, Russia will dictate. And based upon the terms dictated by Russia, there could be a negotiation on, how to bring about the terms dictated by Russia. But there's not going to be a ceasefire. I mean, one of the conditions of the West is, in order for it to be a negotiation, there has to be a ceasefire. You do understand that Russia will never enter into a ceasefire, because to do so, Russia loses the war. Russia has spent all this time building up the advantages it currently enjoys, and it has the enemy throttled. It has its foot on their neck. The enemy is exhausted. Russia has all the power necessary to finish the job. Why would Russia take its foot off the neck, step back, let the enemy come up, dust itself off, lift some weights, get some nutrition, and be ready to fight again? So no, there's some misperceptions out here, and I think Keith Kellogg and Donald Trump are going to be educated on this, and hopefully they are being educated on this right now by the Russians. I've been watching Larry watches them, Ray watches them. If you guys think you're seeing something different than me, if you think you're seeing, oh no, Putin's he needs to get out of this thing, and he's going to yield on this. He's not going to yield on anything, nothing. Again, I believe that if Donald Trump was smart, he'd be focused more on what a post-Ukraine conflict larger framework settlement could be. That's where the United States has the potential to negotiate. Why do I believe that? Because Russia has said so. If you remember, December 17th, Russia submitted draft treaties of a new European security framework to the United States and NATO. And Russia said, here's the treaty we'd like. We'd like you to read it and then sit down and let's have a discussion about it. So Russia's ready to negotiate that. Russia will not yield 1 inch on any of its fundamental demands on Ukraine. This is an existential issue of survival.
Yeah.
Russia has, its lineage comes from the Soviet Union that suffered 27 million casualties in an existential fight against Nazi Germany. The Russians will not yield. The Russians will not give in. The Russians will not surrender an inch. That's just the reality of this. Is an existential struggle. I don't think Donald Trump realizes that. I mean, when he sits there and he uses exaggerated casualty figures, he's just falling into what I call the Westmoreland trap. It's a trap that Westmoreland fell into in 1967 when he bought into the lies of casualty figures. Ray started an organization, the Sam Adams, award, and it's not after Sam Adams, the American patriot from the Revolutionary time. It's from Sam Adams, a CIA analyst who called out the lies of the casualty exaggeration and the consequences of that. When Westmoreland bought into the lies, he set the United States up for failure. He was saying we're going to win the war because the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong are hitting this curve that they're not going to recover from, and all we have to do is reinforce and we're going to win. He said that in November 1967. Yet right around in 1968, the Tet Offensive came in, triple the numbers of people there. We weren't ready. We lost. Boom. Trump has fallen into the same trap, using fake numbers to set up conditions for a victory, fake references to a failed Russian economy, fake everything. You can impress yourself, you can fool yourself, but it doesn't change the reality. It doesn't matter how many times the Pentagon put out reports about North Vietnamese casualties. The reality was the truth on the ground, and that truth is what played out. The reality in Ukraine is the truth on the ground, the truth in Ukraine, the truth on the battlefield, the truth in Russia. And Trump is so far removed from that truth with the numbers he's citing that his plan doesn't stand a snowball's chance in hell. It's not going to get any traction. The Russians are going to give him the courtesy of one shot. One shot. Now, the Munich Security Council, Security Conference isn't that shot. That's a chance for, they're going to float something out there formally. Because understand, everything we've heard so far isn't an official Trump doctrine. We've gotten leaks. We have a Kellogg paper written back in April of last year, around which a plan was floated supposedly. But remember, what the Russians responding to, people say the Russians rejected the Trump plan. Well, all Putin said is the things we're hearing in the media aren't going to happen. But that wasn't a Trump plan. Trump never said that's my plan. Right now, the Wall Street Journal is talking about a 100-day plan put out by Keith Kellogg. Keith Kellogg hasn't come out and articulated that. This is leaked stuff. And I think it's basically either people close to Trump or people who are against Trump floating these ideas out there. None of them have any chance of success. I think Kellogg's going to float something in Munich. And it's basically going to be a straw man, throw it out there, see what happens. The Russians are going to say no. And eventually, Trump is going to have to be realistic about this. This is why he's put, we're talking 90-day window. The Munich Security Security Conference comes in, it's going to fail. It's going to delay the phone call. It's going to delay the meeting because Trump should know, and I think the Russians have made it clear, you get one shot at this. We're going to give you one shot at saying what you need to say to make this war come to an end. We've told you everything you need to say. If you choose not to say it, we no longer care about you, and we will continue. The Russians have prepared it. Larry and Ray, I'm sure you've been following the same thing. They have made decisions, strategic decisions about their economy, about their military, about growth that project sustainable growth, meaning the kind of growth necessary to sustain this war through 2027 into 2028. The Russians are playing that game right now. Budanov, the head of Ukrainian intelligence, says Ukraine can't survive through the summer. So the Russians have this thing all planned out. Even if the United States comes in and injects stuff that we don't have it to inject, but if we inject something that breathes artificial life, one more hit of the AED and the corpse comes to life, Ukraine can't last that long. It'll be all over. Meanwhile, NATO is falling apart at the seams. I mean, it's just collapsing as we speak. The realization they can't afford this stuff. I mean, the Germans came out and just said, we can't go to 10%. We can't even go to 5% because we don't have the budget to support that. Macron, we're going to double the French military budget. The French Treasury, no, you're not. The British, we're talking big, but we're shrinking because NATO can't afford. NATO is collapsing as we speak. The European Union's fraying, and so all of the things that would have to happen to make Ukraine viable is not. And then I'll leave it with this: that man you saw on the TV screen, Zelensky, that's a coked up, desperate man. Every word he says is so far removed from reality. He's a man in a panic, a sense of panic. He understands that the world is closing in around him. That's not the talk of a responsible person. No responsible leader would sit there and say, you have to give me nuclear weapons and missiles so I can deal with the Russian. Literally, I mean, he's an embarrassment to himself, to Ukraine, and to the West that propped him up. And all that does is solidify Russia's point is, we're not doing business with this guy. The Russians have a plan. Keith Keller's going to present a plan at the Munich Security Council. I'm telling you right now, I would put almost every dollar I own that the final plan for peace settlement is going to be the Russian plan because it's the only plan that counts. And the Russians have thought this through to a T. They know exactly what they want to accomplish and how they want to accomplish. My best advice to Donald Trump is find out what the Russian plan is, find a way to relabel it the Trump plan, and you can walk away with a win. But otherwise, you're just going to get mud in your face. And Russia isn't any other country in the world, except maybe China. China can step up to the United States as well. But Trump can't. I think we've had this conversation before. His threat of $45 a barrel, oil, one that requires the Saudis to cooperate. And the Saudis right now are saying we have a break-even margin at $88 or $85. We're already losing money, 78. You asked us to lower the price. We ain't lowering the price anymore because we can't afford to do it. Plus, this nonsense in Gaza, you want us to lower oil while you're committing, you're talking about genocide. So the Saudis are out of it. But the real factor here is domestic. The West Permian, the Permian Basin, West Texas. There's two kinds of oil fields there. One is an established well, $66 a barrel break-even point. The other one is new. The established well is like $34 a barrel break-even point. The new drills, $66 a barrel. If you drop oil to $45 a barrel, you're going to lose 1/3, 30% of America's oil production in 2 years is going to be gone, and it's not going to recover. That'll destroy the American economy. So there's no aspect of the Kellogg-Trump plan that has any viability whatsoever. That insane idiot on TV, look, I'm not here to tell people what to do, but there was a South Vietnamese president back in the early 60s named Diem, who was causing a lot of headaches for the United States because he wasn't playing the game that we wanted played. And he ended up dead. And if Zelensky isn't careful, he's going to end up dead because he's become a problem, a huge problem for the United States, problem for Europe, a huge problem for Ukraine. There's no aspect of him that factors into anything called a solution. And you saw it right there in front of you. That's insanity. That's literally a man who has lost his mind. Half of me wants to feel sorry for him, except that I remember in 2019, after he won an election based upon a peace platform, he held a war council where he pounded the table and said, I am going to take us to war with Russia. You got your war, pal. Fool around, find out.
Ray, let me bring you in here to respond.
What you've just gotten from Scott are what we call facts on the ground. The reality here. Now, what happened to this telephone call? I mean, what's been a long time now since Trump was going to make this telephone call? Well, I'm reliably informed that he's had people trying to get through to Moscow, but the answer is the Russians are busy. The Russians are busy. And they are busy. They've pretty much conquered the remaining redoubts there, preventing them from going all the way to the Dnieper River. Let me put it this way. The Russians have 4 aces in their hand. Trump has 2 deuces, okay? Trump is beginning to realize that. People are beginning to tell him, look, it's not like Joe Biden and Jake Sullivan, and these other guys told you. It's really, really serious. We've lost this damn thing. Now let's see if we can work this out. How do we get rid of Zelensky? Well, I know. We'll call elections. We'll call for elections, and he'll never win the election. Then we put somebody in there we work with. Okay? Meanwhile, well, the Russians are just going ahead in their inexorable way. If we talk to them now, it's going to show up that we only have 2 deuces and they have 4 aces. So let's keep trying to get through, but let's not have inflated expectations. Now, what's going to happen in the long run is that there will be some talks, I believe, but it will be after Trump realizes that he's got an extremely weak hand, and it will all be PR, okay? What Trump will tell the American people is, I had a long discussion with my friend Vlad, and I persuaded him not to go into the rest of Ukraine west of the Dnieper River. He promised me he wasn't going to go into Poland. He's not going to go to take the Baltic states. So, yeah, well, Biden told you, of course, he was going to do that. I persuaded him not to. Okay. Now we reached a deal here, and there is some flexibility here. Russia doesn't want to take the rest of Ukraine. There will be a deal, but would have to take into account Russia's strategic security interests, and that's what Larry and Scott have been saying. And that's going to be a tough negotiation. What about NATO? Well, I think NATO is falling apart as we speak. And that's why I have this unorthodox suggestion that if NATO is falling apart and will have fallen apart in 15 years, what's to prevent the Russians from making a big concession and saying, okay, we won't insist that Ukraine not join NATO. We'll defer that. We'll defer that for 15 years. We'll revisit that. No way, either way, right now, we're revisiting. NATO won't exist in 15 years. So I see the makings of a deal, but it has to come of a realization on Trump's part that Biden didn't know what the hell he was doing, neither did Blinken or Sullivan. And his security advisor has been ill-informed by Sullivan. So the real deal is possible. It's just that they have to face into the reality. And as Scott so well explained them, the facts on the ground, and that is an expression the Russians continue to use. We're willing to deal. We were willing to deal. We did agree to deal in April of 2002, but now the facts on the ground are different. We're willing to deal, but only on the new facts on the ground.
Yeah, and Larry, I wanted you to comment on this in the context of, Ray talks about facts on the ground. So did Scott, and Scott also brought up the fraudulent character of this so-called peace plan that Trump's team has floated out. But also, there's also a timing thing here. We know Trump is full of bluster, but at the same time, he did say that Ukraine was going to be ended as soon as possible. Right now, we're only at the point of kind of an ambiguous talks. There's no meeting on the way. And Scott has just said Russia's not going to negotiate this. It's not going to negotiate what has been put out there thus far. And so my question to you, Larry, is what do you think about this? And in my estimation, it's like, why would Russia negotiate? So far, I don't see much seriousness yet here right now. Your thoughts?
Well, let me quote a great American. Read and listen to what the Russians say and write. Ray, great American. Yeah, I'm quoting Ray McGovern. He's right. The problem here is Trump's assumption. Trump comes out of a real estate, doing real estate deals primarily. He's entered this assuming that Vladimir Putin is the bankrupt owner of a failing casino that's upside down on its mortgage, and that if they don't get a deal soon, they're gonna jump off the top of the building. Well, that's not the case. Vladimir Putin is flush with cash, owns the building. They're making more money every day. So Trump's problem is he has no leverage, or the only leverage that Trump has that could bring a swift end to this war is, one, pull the plug on all military assistance to Ukraine tomorrow, cut them off completely. The USAID money's already gone away, so that's a step in the direction. And then offer the Russians to say, look, we're not going to build the NATO bases in Romania and Poland. Okay. Russia would probably say, all right, now we got something to talk about. But Russia's made it very clear. Putin said it. Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister, said it. Sergei Rybkov, the deputy foreign minister, said it. Navenzia, the UN ambassador for Russia, has said it. Right now, the deal on the table is this: Ukraine must pull out all of its forces from Russian territory, which includes Zaporizhia, Kherson, Donetsk, Luhansk. That's point number one. Point number two, that there is going to be no relationship whatsoever with NATO, that NATO is off the table. And the third point, which Scott alluded to, is that you're going to have a legitimate negotiator, someone who's politically legitimate in Ukraine for us to deal with. But Russia's not going to be dealing with Ukraine. It will be dealing with the United States on these broader issues. And look, Putin is holding a whole number of Trump cards, some of them gifted to him personally by Donald Trump. For example, it was Trump that walked away from the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Agreement, INF. And Russia said, well, they tried to save it. Trump walks away from it. What does Russia do? Oreshnik. They create a missile that would have been a violation under the INF that now can destroy any target in Europe. And there's nothing that the Europeans have to counter that. Thanks to George W. Bush and his abrogation of the ABM treaty, Russia is sitting there free to build air defense systems that surpass anything that the West could field. And it doesn't even have it on the drawing board yet. So Trump is at an actual disadvantage because, what he can go in and ask Putin, oh, yeah, we'd like you to give up the Oreshnik. And Putin's going to be, why do I give that up? You guys don't have one. I'm going to keep mine. Thank you. So Trump is actually in probably the weakest negotiating position he's ever been in his life. And there's not a single thing that Russia needs from the West right now. And they don't, and they recognize that there's not a written agreement that the West can be trusted to uphold. They violated Minsk 1, they violated Minsk 2, they sabotaged the peace talks that had actually reached the point of producing a document in Turkey, I guess it was Ankara, back in April of 2022. So right now, the Russians have zero faith in anything that the West offers. So, just pay attention to what the Russians are saying, what they're writing. They're not saying, oh my God, we're losing so many people. Boy, we need to cut a deal. No, they said, in fact, Sergei Rubkov said today, we're waiting to hear from the Americans a substantive deal. Till we get something of substance, we got nothing to talk about. Have a nice day.
Hello and welcome to another episode of India and Global Left. If you are new to our show, please smash that subscribe button. You can also support us by joining as a YouTube member, be a Patreon, or donate small amount in the link given in the description below. But the least you can do is to watch the show, hit like, share, and please comment. Without further ado, let me welcome our guest today, Professor Muhammad Marandi. Professor Marandi teaches at the University of Tehran. Professor Marandi, welcome back to India and Global Left.
Thank you very much for inviting me again.
I want to discuss what's going on in Washington, D.C. The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, said Donald Trump yesterday at a press conference in Washington with his buddy, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. We will own it, he said, proposing to convert Gaza into a new real estate named Riviera. I just wanted to ask you, what's your first impression on two things? One is to have a criminal in the White House being given such a reception. And secondly, this total disregard for any kind of international norm and being such a lunatic state as the US is always, but so brazenly. Your first impression on these two accounts?
Well, the White House has always housed criminals, so you shouldn't expect criminals not to be invited as guests. Trump is no more or no less criminal than Biden or Obama. Biden brought about the genocide in Gaza. He gave the ammunition and the weapons and the aid alongside the Europeans and others. And regional countries like Turkey, like Egypt, like Jordan, like the Emirates, they facilitated the genocide through trade and business. And so there are a lot of people who are responsible for the genocide. And Trump is a genocide supporter, so he's no different from Biden. And then, of course, Obama, who carried out the genocide in Yemen alongside the Saudis and the Emiratis and the Europeans and NATO, and then, of course, the destruction of Libya. And as we saw recently, Tulsi Gabbard in the Senate confirmation hearings She spoke about the dirty war in Syria and about the fake chemical attacks and how the United States and its allies, like Mr. Erdogan, among others, supported Al Qaeda and ISIS in Syria and finally brought them to power. So Trump is, he has no special place in this list of genocidal leaders or supporters of genocide. But I think, of course, obviously his statements were void of any morality, shameful and disgusting. But I don't think it's, at least my interpretation is that it's not a serious plan. I think that obviously the people of Gaza, the Palestinians there, they show that they're not going anywhere after surviving a almost 16-month long Holocaust. But I think the real objective is probably, and this is just my personal speculation, is that Trump is in a stronger position than Netanyahu. And Netanyahu was forced to accept the ceasefire because of the resilience of the resistance, the axis of resistance, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, Hezbollah, Ansarullah, and all of them together put a lot of pressure on the Israeli regime, and ultimately Trump forced the ceasefire. And I think that that puts him in a commanding position compared to Netanyahu. And in this meeting, I think Trump sort of gave this as a said this in order to strengthen Netanyahu's position so that Netanyahu would continue with the ceasefire. I think that's how it's working. I think that right now Netanyahu has a problem because he promised his fanatical allies in the cabinet that he will continue the war. He'll go back to the war. But I think Trump doesn't want war, not because he's a great person, but because he wants quiet. That's how I see it. And so Trump is he's given some concessions like the bunker busters that will be used to kill people and innocent people in future. And probably he will give concessions in the West Bank, I assume. Again, it's speculation. But I think what he wants from Netanyahu is for him to continue with the ceasefire. And so he said this in order to make Netanyahu's coalition partners happy. And I think they are happy because they're hoping that they can expel the Palestinians. So I think maybe the reason why he did this was not because he really wants to do it, but he wants to strengthen Netanyahu's hand and keep him in power, and thus Netanyahu will give him a concession, and that is not to expand the war. And also probably Netanyahu wants the United States to attack Iran, and of course that's I think that would bring down the Trump regime if there was war with Iran. So I think in order to get AIPAC off his back, Netanyahu off his back, and to push for the second phase of the ceasefire, he said, okay, we're going to empty Gaza of Palestinians, and we're not going to implement the third phase of the deal. But I think he wants at least to get to the second phase, finish the second phase of the ceasefire agreement. That's how I see it. That's how I'm interpreting it. Because I can't see any scenario when the United States goes into Gaza and tries to clear out Gaza. It's not going to happen. And no country in the region can afford to help them out. I mean, true, Egypt, Jordan, Mr. Erdogan, the Emirates, all of them collaborated with Israelis or cooperated with Israelis, but none of them can afford to take in refugees, because I think that will be the camel that, the straw that breaks the camel's back.
In fact, when Netanyahu left for DC, his finance minister Bezalel Smotrich was threatening to collapse his government if he doesn't restart the war with Hamas again. And apparently, he seems to be a bit happy with what Trump has said. But I want to ask you that a key question that has been left out open within the ceasefire is the question of who rules Gaza. And the answer has to be quite obvious. It has to be people of Gaza who would elect who would rule them. But it seems that Israel, the United States, and vast majority of the West, even France and Germany, which came out and condemned what Trump said on Tuesday, said that, but we stand by the fact that Hamas should go. And it seems to me that Trump's instigation kind of blackmails the Palestinians to have their own leadership if Hamas is their overwhelming choice, which seems to be the case. Your comment on that observation?
Well, first I have to point something out, and that is that it may be that Trump actually tries to take over Gaza. I'm not saying that it won't happen. And my analysis, what I feel that Trump may be after, does not lessen the sheer immorality of his statement. And the world should mobilize against Trump in the United States and condemn him for this, and to put pressure on regional countries to stop cooperating with the United States. And these verbal condemnations by governments, these are useless. There has to be pressure. So I'm not belittling what he said. I'm just saying that I don't think that he's serious about emptying Gaza. And it is hypocritical that these European regimes are condemning him for what he said about Gaza, but they supported the Holocaust in Gaza. So it's okay to slaughter the Palestinians, but it's not okay to expel them from their land. There is no, they're not taking a moral position. These are immoral leaders, just as immoral as Trump. But I don't think Trump or the Europeans are in any position to impose anything on Gaza. And Hamas is not going to give up any power or authority because they have popular support. And the allies of Hamas, like Islamic Jihad, they are going to strengthen Hamas. And all of their partners in the resistance in Gaza will stick with them. The Palestinian Authority has no popular support. In the West Bank, they're not popular either. In polls that were recently carried out, they only had a very small segment of support among the population, and those are largely people who are corrupted by the system. And that's how the Israelis have been working for decades. That's how the West works. That's how all these Western NGOs work in Lebanon and elsewhere. They corrupt societies, and and through them, they bring about regime change, color revolutions, or other forms of misery upon people. So the Palestinian Authority is only in power because the Israeli regime is behind them in the West Bank. But in Gaza, they have absolutely no chance whatsoever of taking over. And we have to all recall that, what happened after the elections and how Hamas won those elections. If there were elections held today, I have no doubt that not only would Hamas and its allies together win in Gaza, they would win in the West Bank. But the Europeans and the Americans, they have no interest in democracy. They never had any interest in democracy. I think that facade, that is all gone now. After Gaza, I think no sane person believes that the West believes in human rights or women's rights or children's rights or freedom of speech or anything like that. That is all out the window. And again, it's just like the Europeans condemning Trump for saying the Palestinians must go, but for 16 months, almost 16 months, they've been helping out with the Holocaust.
The world has to learn how to live with Trump, who openly threatens the sovereignty of any country, but it's difficult for the West to learn to live with someone that the Palestinians elect for themselves. I want to ask you about the so-called Abraham Accord, given Trump is said to be one of the architects of that accord, which is normalizing ties between the absolutist Gulf states, including Saudi Arabia and Israel. Something that Noam Chomsky, when we communicated, he used to come to our show often, and he said that it's a coalition of reactionary states put together to put a further blow to the rights of the Palestinians. Saudi Arabia and every other state in the region has reacted against what Trump said. Does this put Trump's own Abraham Accord at stake?
Well, a couple of things actually that I can say about this is that whether it's the Abraham Accords or whether it's just this, this claim that regional countries are going to support the removal of the Palestinian people, what Trump is doing is he's weakening his own allies. He's weakening these despots, because whether he's lying or not, and whether they really in secret agree with him or not to try to remove the Palestinian people, a lot of people are going to question their governments. They're going to question these regimes. People in these Arab dictatorships in the Persian Gulf, or in Egypt, or in Jordan, or elsewhere, they're going to asking themselves, are our governments secretly negotiating to help the Americans and the Israelis remove the Palestinians? So even if it's not true, it raises questions. And that undermines the legitimacy of these regimes in the eyes of their own people. So what Trump is doing by making these claims is that he's weakening his own camp. He's weakening members of his own camp. He's weakening these regimes that are already weak and vulnerable even further. And so whether it's and if it's the Abraham Accords, it's the same, because right now, after what happened in Gaza and the Holocaust that we saw there, and now the brutality, the sheer brutality that we're seeing in the West Bank, and of course the genocidal attacks in Lebanon and so on, no one can really pursue the Abraham Accords and not be afraid. I mean, the Saudis, I'm sure, would be very worried about taking a step in that direction after what has happened in Gaza. So it's going to, if they do move in that direction, it's going to be costly and dangerous. But in any case, Trump has weakened his own allies. He's weakened these proxies. And it's very interesting, by the way, that the terrorists who rule over Syria right now, the Europeans are fine with the terrorists, but they want Hamas to go. They're fine with Al-Qaeda and ISIS in Syria. And you see these diplomats and you see these politicians from the UK and elsewhere going to visit them, but Hamas must go. So the people who carried out 9/11, the people who carried out beheadings, the people who burned all these people alive, the people who would drown people in cages, these are all good. Jolani or Shara, he killed thousands of Iraqis with car bombs in Baghdad and other cities. That's fine. He can, he's a good guy. And one of the things I think is really important is that to keep in mind is those people in our region who support these terrorists in Syria, their position is very hypocritical, because on the one hand, they don't trust the United States. They say that the United States is evil and how it conspires against the Palestinian people. But on the other hand, they're on the same side as the Americans, and they've been on the same side as the Americans in Syria for the last 13, 14 years. So they've been helping the United States pursue its dirty war in Syria to destroy Syria along, Mr. Erdogan. He's responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Syrians. These people they're answerable. They have to answer that question. How is it that U.S. policy in Syria is something that you support, but you condemn it in Palestine. But in any case, I think that it's going to be virtually impossible after what has happened in Gaza to bring any of the regimes in the region, even those that have relations with Netanyahu, like Erdogan, like Abdullah of Jordan, like Sisi, and like Mohammed bin Zayed, to ask them to do more than what they're already doing will be very difficult. So I think the Abraham Accords or the notion of expelling Palestinians from their homeland, I think that's just out of the question.
We had former U.S. Ambassador Chas Freeman recently on our show, and something he said I wanted your reaction is, he said Israel has achieved the impossible, which is bring together the Shia and the Sunni world in the Middle East together, at least as far as the Palestinian cause goes. Do you think there is something in that statement?
Yes, I believe that is true to a significant degree. The United States has been creating a divide between a sectarian divide, racial. They've been using sectarianism, racism, and religious hatred for many years now, many decades now. But especially after the revolution in Iran, it's been used much more, and often through Saudi Arabia in the 1980s and the 1990s. Until Mohammed bin Salman came to power, and he distanced himself from these extremist groups, and their funding has decreased ever since. But interestingly, now it's Mr. Erdogan who's taken over, and it's Qatar that is funding these extremist groups almost exclusively. So they're now his henchmen. But yes, these groups have had a huge impact. But I think that after the sacrifices made by Hezbollah in Gaza, which are unique, I mean, the people of Gaza fought for their lives, but Hezbollah willingly sacrificed themselves to help to save the people of Gaza. And the war on the Lebanese border was unprecedented. There's never been such an intense war between the Israeli regime and anyone, compared to when we look at what was going on for a couple of months along the Lebanese border. And ultimately, the ceasefire was just a decrease in the hostilities. Otherwise, the Israelis kept their forces along in the north. So Hezbollah. They made huge sacrifices. Ansarullah made huge sacrifices. The Iraqis, and we saw that in Abu Ubaida's speech. He thanked Iran, he thanked Hezbollah, he thanked Ansarullah, he thanked the Iraqis, and he thanked Jordanian citizens who, on their own, at their own initiative, went into Palestine and fought, and were martyred. So I think that is very substantial, and that I think. Weakened this racist and sectarian narrative that has been created that has been promoted for decades now, and it currently is being promoted by Qatar and others and Turkey and the Turkish regime. But in any case, it is something that should be of concern always, because as the West grows weaker, in order to maintain hegemony, they have to use the tools of divide and rule more extensively.
My final question is about U.S.-Iran relationship. Donald Trump, just having come to power, also signed an executive order to impose the sanctions even more brutally on Iran, while maintaining that he is open to a deal. That's something that he is doing even with the Russians, even with everyone. And I wanted to ask you, what's the feeling in Tehran and Iran in general about the US at this moment as far as their relationship goes? And secondly, to what extent is Iran worried about further sanctions, given a lot of oil trade now goes to China, and the United States is imposing tariff war and trade war on China as well? To what degree the US can actually hurt the Iranian economy, given there is also idea and popularity among sections in Iran that they should normalize relationship with the West because the economy takes the toll?
Well, I've been in Moscow for the last 3, days, so I don't know exactly. I have to go back to Tehran to be able to give a better answer to that question. As far as I know, and I've been very busy, so I haven't been following the news as well as I should have. But as far as I know, it's not an executive order. But in any case, the United States has already imposed maximum pressure sanctions on Iran. When Biden came to power, he did not remove any of those sanctions. In fact, he's repeatedly been adding new sanctions, to new companies or companies that have been created, they get sanctioned and so on. So there really isn't anything for Trump to sanction. And it's just like Russia. Iran and Russia are both basically under maximum pressure sanctions. In fact, recently the Russian oil fleet and their oil and gas companies, which have been sanctioned, basically what that's done is it made Russia become more like Iran, because Iran has already been sanctioned. This oil and gas industry completely, this banking industry as well. So the Iranians have learned how to circumvent the sanctions regime, and it does trade with China, not because during the last 4 years the United States has become more lenient, but because Iran and China have devised new ways to do trade without being vulnerable to the Americans, without using Western financial institutions and so on, and by not using tankers that are under the authority of the West or fearful of Western dictates. So I cannot say for certain, but I think it will be much more difficult for Trump to be able to put pressure on Iran this time around. I'm not saying he's not going to do anything or that he won't be able to do some things, but this is not 7 years ago. The situation is much different. And China, as I think you were alluding, as you were saying, I think you're implying that China is also different from the China 7, 8 years ago, and it has a vested interest in ignoring the United States, or is going to resist the United States more today than before. So I don't think that the Americans have many cards up their sleeves, and Trump doesn't have a special card up his sleeve that Biden didn't have. There's nothing new there's nothing new. He doesn't have some special power or some special authority that didn't exist before. So I think it's going to be more difficult. In Iran, there are those who want an agreement with the United States, but I think that in general, the mood in Tehran is different from 2015. In 2015, after we signed a nuclear agreement with the United States, they began violating it from day one under Obama, and then Trump tore up the agreement. So even though many do want an agreement, but they don't want to be cheated again like in 2015. So Iran's position today is much stronger than it was back then, and the United States has many more difficulties, like the war in Ukraine. So the circumstances have changed. Iran has a stronger position, and also, Trump not only did the United States violate the JCPOA, the nuclear deal, and then later on Trump tore it up, but also we saw the Minsk Accords, how the West betrayed Russia, and also now Trump is saying the third phase of the ceasefire agreement is rubbish and shouldn't be implemented. That's a ceasefire that was basically signed under his pressure. So if Trump is going to betray the Palestinians and the Russians and the Iranians, I mean, if we look at his past track record, that is going to make it all the more difficult for Iranians and Russians to negotiate with Trump in the future, because he's simply not someone who can be trusted. So negotiations with the United States, potential negotiations, I don't know if they will take place, but the Iranians are going to be much more cautious than before.
Professor Morandi, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Kofi, follow me.